everyone, and welcome back to my channel. And today is actually going to be Vlogmas Day 4, but also a video that I've been waiting an entire year to make. And that is, we are going to be reviewing and talking about every single book that I read in 2024. Alright, so I did whip out my Goodreads for this, and I definitely did forget some of my thoughts and rankings, so I will be looking at my computer screen today. But also, I have a bunch of the physical books here that we're going to be talking about. So the first book I read this year, which was in January, was Billy Summers, and I feel like I've talked about this book a ton on my channel this year because this book was part of lots of different videos, and I actually read this for a swapping books with my dad video where he read Survive the Night, and I read Billy Summers by Stephen King. So this book is about Billy Summers, who is, as the back of the book says, a killer for hire, and he's just got hired to do his last mission, which the money will for sure put him in retirement. And this means that Billy kind of has to pretend to be a regular person in this town. He's also going to pursue his passion of writing, and he definitely has to focus on his mission and try not to get caught. He does meet some people along the way that he does not expect to be as important as they are. This book to me kind of felt like it was split in half, and I definitely preferred the first half than the second half. The second half I felt got a little crazy. I gave this book 4 stars. It has a 4.19 average rating, so definitely a good one to pick up my first Stephen King book. And so as a Stephen King book, as someone who doesn't like horror, this was a fun, exciting, adventurous read. The next book I read was The Hunger Games Book 1, which was a super fun read. I gave this book 4 stars because it was just so spectacular. However, the writing just felt super young, and it made me really dislike Katniss, so there was like a couple things there that definitely didn't make it a 5-star read for me. But that was my first time reading The Hunger Games. It made me want to read other books that are based on movies, but I've only like watched the movie. Of course, I followed that up with Catching Fire, which has always been my favorite movie, but now I can say for sure is also my favorite book in the trilogy, and I give this 5 stars. Super interesting. I feel like I don't need to explain the premise of The Hunger Games, but if you don't know, very quickly, there's 12 districts, and every year they have to have 2 kids, a boy and a girl, randomly drawn to compete in this like cornucopia, like arena place thing. And there can only be one survivor, and our main character Katniss does end up competing in. I feel like this is like very like, I don't need to worry about spoiling, but basically the second book, we're back in the Hunger Games, but the stakes are so much higher, and this book just had so many more interesting elements to me. I'm so interested in the backstories of previous competitors. I love Finn. However, the books tell a way different story about Haymitch and so many of those other people that I found so compelling and interesting. Next, I obviously read Mockingjay, which I gave 3 stars. I don't know, I feel like I was being really nice with that 3 stars. I remember finding it quite boring, and the only interesting parts are like constantly interrupted, so didn't super love the 3rd book, but as like a whole trilogy, it's like so 5 stars. Like, it's amazing, and I really loved getting to read it. The next book I read was The Woman in Me by Britney Spears. That's obviously Britney Spears' memoir. I was disappointed that it wasn't read by Britney. I did listen to this as an audiobook. There were a couple interesting points here. However, the headlines I think cover the gist of the interesting stuff in this memoir. Next, I read Bride by Ali Hazelwood, and I adore Ali Hazelwood, and I love that she decided to jump into my other favorite genre, which is fantasy. And this book was so awesome. I gave it 5 stars. It was just like such a snack. It was just enjoyable and a good time. I had like no deep thoughts about this. It was just such a silly fun and really interesting time. And this book is about our vampire main character, Misery. Oh, it's been a while. There's also, yeah, we have our alpha wolf, and the vampires, the humans, and the werewolves are all making kind of new alliances and new deals. So to strengthen the alliance, our main character is in an arranged marriage with the alpha, but Misery's reason for agreeing to this is much different than his is, because her best friend has gone missing, and she finds a clue that thinks she might be somewhere around and to do with these werewolves. It had everything I needed it to have had. I definitely like recommend this book to pretty much anyone, so I hope you enjoy. The next book I read was When in Rome by Sarah Adams. I gave this 3 stars. I don't really want to say a ton about this. It's a celebrity romance, small town, classic tropes. Again, I think if I was harsher at the time, because I really became a harsher rater over the year, I think I would have given this an even lower rating. I just found it not super interesting. The next book I read was The Bodyguard by Catherine Center. I gave this 5 stars. This was a celebrity romance, but I did not find it annoying. I found it super interesting, and it's basically about our main character who is a bodyguard, and she's just gone through a breakup and she is on an assignment. Basically, our other main character is a celebrity who doesn't want a bodyguard, but because of a lot of recent threats, he just kind of has to suck it up and deal with this bodyguard. And it has to be really undercover, so there actually is a fake dating trope. And this fake dating goes so far as to try and convince his own personal family that they are dating. There was a lot of scenes that really built up the relationship between our characters that were like really meaningful and not super like stupid. The ending of this book was really crazy, but I found it super fun and interesting to read, so I'm not going to complain about it, but it was a little bit slightly out of pocket. The next book I read was The Cheat Sheet by Sarah Adams, which, unlike her other book, I gave this one 4 stars. I found this book a really good time. I really was wanting to continue to pick up this story and to keep, you know, going. I felt like our 2 main characters were just sweet and I wanted to root for them. So I really thought, like, you know, I was a big supporter of our couple in this. They have really cute backstories. We have our ballerina and our professional football player, and they both have their own dreams. But an event happens where they have to fake date for an advertisement because one of our main characters really needs some money, so she's okay to go along with this. However, they both have been absolutely obsessed with each other since they met when they ran together for the first time. And it's just like such a like wholesome-y story, and it was really cute. So I liked this one. I thought it was just sweet. It was a little feel good. Oh my goodness. Then I read the follow-up to When in Rome. I read Practice Makes Perfect by Sarah Adams. Okay. I gave this book 3 stars. I feel like I've also talked about this book a lot. It is a book where one of the bodyguards from our original celebrity in the first book, he kind of comes back to town and he's there to bodyguard her, obviously. However, the sister of the male in that couple, this is her story, and she kind of runs a flower shop, and she's kind of like angry that everyone always thinks she's this really good girl who like is so innocent and sweet, and she made her personality trait reading spicy books and, you know, wanting to feel different, which is fine. I just feel like it was a really like weak like character development, and it really felt not believable at all. This relationship felt very forced, and I didn't really super love this book. I did give it 3 stars though, because there were some parts that just kept me listening and interested. I do not think that I will read Beg, Borrow, Steal, which I think is the 3rd book, I think, about the 3rd sister. Or not even the 3rd sister, the 2nd sister. This might be a 4-book thing. I just don't think I'll continue reading. To me, it just feels like very like overdone. I then read Hello Stranger by Catherine Center, which I read as a part of my 24-hour reading challenge, which I think related to my ranking of 3 stars. Because at the time I was reading this, I was very sleep deprived and a little like grumpy. And I don't think I fully remembered everything, so I don't think I fully got the story. But basically, our main character, something happens where she develops facial blindness, and she is actually a like portrait painter. Like, she paints faces for a living, and there's a very important contest coming up, and she has this face blindness, and she's really dealing with a lot of how to like deal with that and navigate her new life while she's trying to hide the fact that she has facial blindness. And there's kind of 2 guys who she kind of both likes, and then one of them kind of seems to like totally abandon her. There's just a bunch of stuff going on in her life. However, like the plot twist, I don't even know if the author was planning on it being a plot twist, but super predictable. You could probably see where it's going from the synopsis, but I gave it 3 stars. But like, other than the predictability that kind of made me lose interest a little bit, it was a really nice story and it was pretty good other than that. So if you just like need something for the sake of something, like totally this is an option. Okay, so I totally actually forgot to mention this book. I read this book after the Britney Spears memoir, but this is Vicious by V.E. Schwab, which I think I gave 4 stars, but it's a book that I think about constantly, so I'd even like say 4.5. And this is about Eli and Victor, and it starts off by giving us a past and present. It's such an interesting story because in this we have Victor and Eli in college, and they basically need to come up with a topic that they need to be researching, and Eli comes up with a topic of these kind of like supernatural people. I forget what they're referred to in this book. Victor kind of goes along with this, and he also wants to start researching this, and they find a reason for how to create these people with these supernatural powers, and although it's risky, they both attempt to do it. And through this process, they really become enemies and they really become jealous of each other, and just things happen, and one of them ends up actually in prison, and we don't know why until much later in the book. And one of our characters has made it their mission to have a passion for destroying other people who have these hidden like supernatural powers, since they're not even confirmed really for the general population to be existing. And our other character, all he cares about is kind of destroying the life of the other person. And there's just such a deep backstory and tension between these two people. It's just like the tension created between these two people is insane, and it's amazing. Like, it really was a really good book, and I read it during the like fall/winter, which was such a perfect time. It's such a moody, atmospheric book, you know, so like rainy and foggy, and you can really feel that. It's such a dark academia book, and it was just like, in terms of the atmosphere, like really amazing. I haven't read the follow-up book because Eli, my boyfriend, not in here, told me that it wasn't amazing, so I didn't really want to waste my time with that. The next book I read with Icebreaker, I gave this 5 stars. It was so good. It was amazing. I loved it. Oh my god. Like, wow. This book was stupid. They don't go to one college class. However, it was also so amazing and was just so fun to like enjoy, because even though it was super silly, like, it was really entertaining. And this is about Nate and Anastasia, and basically Anastasia is a figure skater and Nate is a hockey. They both go to the same college, and one day one of the ice rinks is destroyed, and so both of these people who have very big things coming up in their sports careers have to be practicing on the same rink, so both the figure skater teams and the hockey team. And so there's a lot of tension between these two groups. Just know they go to like a lot of parties. Like, they're partying every other chapter. There's also a couple like trigger warnings for topics, and I don't think those topics are very well addressed here. So that's the only reason I'm saying that, is just because I don't love the way some things are portrayed and how easily certain things are resolved. So that's my only like real critique there, but otherwise it was just such a really fun time, and I truly like enjoyed it. It was probably one of my favorite books of this entire year, and doesn't matter that it's silly. This was great. Okay, so now I read It Happened One Summer. This is by Tessa Bailey. I gave it a 3 stars because, let's be real, like, Tessa Bailey, she's trying to be super fun and silly, and she just wants to write a romance. Like, there's nothing like crazy going on there. It's a romance between a like fisherman in a small town and this super rich kid. As punishment, she's actually sent to live in this town that her dad used to live in, her dad who passed away. And she's used to this party girl, rich girl lifestyle, but luckily her sister decided to come along with her, and they try and figure out what it's like to be like a regular person living in society and just learning basic life skills. And I think that annoys a lot of the people in the town. Yeah, they kind of come to learn to love this small town beach town lifestyle. Hook, line, and sinker is the sister who is now in the movie business, and she's actually filming a film in this small town, and I gave that one 3 stars. I think honestly they are both pretty equal in my mind for how much I enjoyed them. They were both not super memorable, and I don't love talking about them. The next book I read was It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. I've never read a Colleen Hoover book, but decided to join in on the controversy. There's a lot being said about this book, about this author. It's kind of all died down a little bit now, but there's definitely some strong opinions. However, looking at this book by itself, I like completely binged it in 2 days. As a piece of literature, this was really complex and I think generates a lot of sympathy towards people in a similar situation. Of course, there's lots of trigger warnings. One of the romance like subplots that takes place, I guess it's not a subplot, but I found really endearing and I found really sweet, and I felt like the movie was very similar to the book. And aside from like the casting drama, just on its own, I found, again, as a piece of media, something to be that I enjoyed consuming. So regardless of like the messaging and all that, that's an isolated opinion. In terms of did Colleen write about certain subjects, well, I cannot really speak on that. I don't know. In terms of like the other products and spin-offs she's made, it might be in poor taste. I do think that she just wants to keep making money as much as she can. I don't know Colleen as a person, so I really can't speak on that. That's all I'm gonna say. That's how I felt. I did give this 5 stars. I found the reading experience to be quite enjoyable for this, so don't hate me. I haven't read a Colleen Hoover since, except for the follow-up book, but One by One by Frida McFadden. I think Frida McFadden's really having a great year. I think people are really discovering her and reading a ton of her backlist. Sorry, if you can hear Gizmo snoring, I'm sorry. That's just what's gonna happen. So One by One by Frida McFadden. Honestly, I read this on a road trip home with my parents from Banff, and my brother, of course. And I really honestly don't remember much of what happened. It's a thriller. They go to a cabin. Everyone's got secrets. They keep disappearing one by one until there's only like 3 of them left. They're like in the woods. Some really silly stuff happens in the beginning. Entertaining. I gave it 3 stars. Haven't read a Frida McFadden since, but I know some other people in my family have, and I hear good things sometimes. I think a few of the books are definitely quite interesting and good to read. The next book I read was The Rule Book by Sarah Adams, which is a follow-up to the cheat sheet. Honestly, I read this book, like, I gave this 4 stars, and when I read this book, I really just needed some escapism, and that's what I got. We have a sports manager and an athlete who used to date in college and kind of have some like hatred towards each other ever since the breakup. However, she really needs this job, and so she tries her best to be his manager, and they kind of like reconnect a little bit. You know, it's a romance. It's not really a spoiler. It was good. I'm not sure why I gave it 4, but it was good. Next, I read The 12-Week Year. I didn't really rate this. I didn't really get the advice out of this fully as someone who's a student and already operates by a semester system. But the advice really is to consider your year maybe in like quarters and to have goals for each quarter, and that really helps you be more productive and actually achieve your goals, because you always feel like the due date is closer to you than it would be if you were looking at like the entire year as a whole. And I get that. It makes sense. But I don't think that needed to be a book. Not sure what happened there. So my camera's gonna die, so hopefully I can get through this a little bit quicker. The next book I read was It Starts With Us, which is obviously the follow-up to this, and this really was meant to be written as like for, you know, the readers kind of thing, as like a thank you, and she does write that in the book. So it's not meant to be the same as the first book. It's really just meant to see what happened to the characters after out of curiosity, and that's pretty much all it is. I give this 4 stars. I was really invested in this particular romance. I really like the main guy. I think he's great. Love seeing what happened to his life. and our main character Lily, we didn't honestly get to I didn't really get to be as a part of her story as in the first book. This really felt like equally both of them, and I did like in the first book being so focused on her that we got so much more of her life. Like we got her friendships and so many other details, whereas this just felt like we needed to get to the end point and didn't really matter how we got there, we just needed to get there. So we're gonna throw in some random stuff, but going into it how it's gonna end. If that makes any sense at all, okay? I have Mile High I read, which I gave 4 stars, I'm pretty sure. And this book is about a flight attendant on a basketball team, I think hockey team, a sports team. And she and one of these dudes kind of don't get along at all, but there is some tension there in a good way. You know, they just, I don't know what to say about this book, honestly, because I read this in one day and I don't remember a ton, but it was good. And I know that there's more in this series that are well loved. So if that whole sports flight attendant thing sounds interesting, it was, so you should give it a try. Okay, this is gonna be a little bit of a different POV for you because my main camera died. I'm now recording this on my phone. It's gonna be equally as enjoyable for you though because I have some interesting books coming up. I read the X-Hex. I was in my fall vibe. This was something for sure. For sure it was. And I give it a 4 stars. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I think it had the witchy vibes, the small town vibes, it had the Halloween vibes, the spooky vibes, the fall vibes. It had all of the vibes, and it was nicely wrapped up into one book, and for that I say thank you to the author because it was fun. And this is about a witch who dated a Penhallow, which is a famous group of witches who are responsible for recharging the ley lines in this town, and they're actually what the town is named after. And he had a summer fling with our main character when I think they were 19, and he disappeared to go marry someone else or something. He went back to Wales, he was gone, out of the picture. She was so upset during the breakup that she jokingly used a Bath & Body Works candle to hex him. However, when he came into town to recharge the ley lines many years later, that hex really came into effect, and then they had to start working together to try and fix this hex. And I'm sure you can see where it goes from there. They had a haunted house. That scene was probably one of my favorites. And there was a lot of cute, fun moments. Of course, there's a witchy shop, and I just enjoyed it as a fall book, so I would say it has hype for a reason. It was a really nice story to read. It was a nice time. However, the next book I read was A Witch's Guide to Fake Dating a Demon. I gave that 3 stars. This book was really annoying sometimes. So the premise is we have our main character witch, and she accidentally summons a demon. However, the rule is when you summon a demon, the demon cannot physically leave your side until you give the demon your soul. So normally people summon a demon to get something and in exchange for their soul. So because our main character did it on accident and she doesn't want to get rid of her soul, she has to just keep him around, and he just has to follow her everywhere she goes. And because he lives on the demon plane and not the human witch plane existence, he's kind of learning how to exist. So if you watch the Christmas movie Hot Frosty, it's a little bit like that, where the snowman turned human is discovering what it's like to be human for the very first time. So he does a bit of a some silly things. There are a few plot holes in this, such as how a baseball cap is somehow able to magically cover up some Maleficent level horns, and somehow after this girl goes through the most traumatic thing ever, all she cares about is some weird contest. But oh well, oh well. If you want to read a witch book, I would definitely say check out your other options and just really, make sure this is the one for you, because honestly it wasn't that interesting. Oh, and the next book I read was Legends and Lattes. Oh, okay, so I know everyone's heard about this book, so I thought I would join in and I would also read this book. And this book put me into a reading slump and just was not good. I give it 2 stars. It's a cozy fantasy about an orc who opens a coffee shop in a town that has never experienced coffee. That is exactly what happens. There is literally nothing else that happens. So I would find it more interesting to play one of those, you know, build a coffee shop video games, you know, like a simulator. Because this just was not it for me. I just found this really boring. I found it really tedious and repetitive, and I found there to be very few character development or compelling parts to these characters that made me care about them. Okay, I feel like his snoring is really loud. If you can hear that, I'm so sorry, but I'm also not sorry. So, okay, the next book I read was The Nightmare Before Christmas. I gave this 4 stars. I found it to be super silly and a fun, good time. I think this is a good transition book from fall books to Christmas and winter books. So this book is about 2 dudes, and one is the Prince of Christmas and one is the Prince of Halloween, and they are actually both fighting for the hand of the Princess of Easter to strengthen each like kingdom of holiday. And through that process they do a lot of fun Christmas activities that really bring them closer together. And obviously there's a romance in this book, and it was, you know, really fun. So that was a slay. The next book I read was Funny Story by Emily Henry, which was definitely like a top book of this year for me personally, and I think the rest of the world. I give this book 5 stars, and I really enjoyed this book. To me, this felt like what I was always searching for in all of the romance books I've talked about so far that I read this summer. That was really nice because it had so much like more, there was so much more depth to these characters and their relationship. It was really like sweet, and I found the town and the friendships to also be equally as interesting. This is about our 2 main characters who their partners each left to be with each other. So these 2 are both left with this breakup, and these were both like long-term relationships. One was engaged, and now one of our characters doesn't have anywhere to live, so she moves in with the guy who got broken up with, and they're kind of just like wallowing in their like grief together in the beginning of the book and dealing with their breakups separately, but then they deal with their breakups together, and then they just start to become friends, which obviously led to a romance. I don't think that's a spoiler in a romance book, but it was really nice. I really liked it, and that's my first Emily Henry book, and I will totally read another one because that just felt like it had so much more to it than a typical romance book does. Not that there's anything wrong with that, obviously, like I love books like that, like this. I also read Hex in the City during my like big fall reading moment and my like witch reading moment, and this book I gave 3 stars, but I feel like I should have given less because I found it super much like a chore to get through. The premise is pretty classic. We have a hexed object and we're trying to get that object back. There's pretty much only one scene that's really interesting, and that has to do with a fire. If you know, you know. Other than that, not a lot of interesting stuff happened, and for some reason it was very difficult for me to follow in terms of like the plot. The author was trying to write a romance and couldn't figure out certain plots or situations that would build up that romance, and it felt really chaotic. I felt like we were always changing the main plot and the focus in a way that didn't really actually make sense. Originally it starts off needing a pendant, and that plot line disappears, but then it comes back when I thought it was resolved, but not really. The writing was just a little unclear. I then read One Day in December by Josie Silver. I gave this book 3 stars. It definitely started off better than how it ended. It started off, yeah, really interesting, and I was invested, and then it ended in a place that felt very chaotic, and we had been through so much to the point where I had come to dislike all of the characters, where in the beginning I liked some, didn't like others, and I had sympathy for some where I didn't have sympathy for others. Basically, we have 2 best friends who are roommates. One day our main character, she is at a bus stop and she has a 1-minute interaction where she makes eye contact with and thinks she has a special connection to a guy. 1 minute and no words were exchanged. And she totally could have made a choice to like get off the bus or him to get on the bus, but no one did. And so one day, after searching for him for a year, her best friend is like, hey, meet my boyfriend, which is obviously a bus boy. It's this guy who she made eye contact with, And they're both holding this secret that's not really a secret, and they honestly should have just said in the beginning, hey, like, oh my god, you're busboy, that's crazy, and just left it at that. And in the beginning of the relationship, if you really like this other girl, maybe before investing in like a 5-year relationship with this person, maybe say something. Both of these girls end up in multiple romances, and like, so does he. There is such a mess created, so many different marriages, such a mess over these two people being unable to communicate, hiding secrets that didn't have to become such big secrets. And it just made me really dislike both these characters because of what they did to other people. Also, everyone in this book cheated at some point. The best friend, she cheated. Our main character, she cheated. The guy, I'm pretty sure he did something. Our other guy who comes and joins in the middle, like they all were cheating. And like in different ways. Some of them were texting, some of them were like actually cheating. Some of them, it's just, ugh. It was such a mess. But the beginning was set up really interesting. It just did not get executed well. Okay, this was one of my this was a book that I was probably like the most excited about, and it's an audiobook only. It was a collaboration, I think. It's a 4-hour and 24-minute audiobook called To Camellia by Ellie Hazelwood, and I thoroughly enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars, and Ellie's really good at having really short stories have so much depth to them, and this was true, and this was really good. I read it in the night. It was really awesome. I loved it so much. It was so cute. And it's about these 2 people who are obsessed with this book series, and they kind of work on different teams, and they are kind of like the lead developers on 2 different teams. And because these teams are like small, they are really fighting to develop this game based on the book series, and it's this part 2. So both of these teams really hate each other, so they go on this like cabin trip as a whole to really bond both of the teams, to prove to the person financing this game that they can trust these teams to work together. And of course 2 of these team members work together way too well, so that happened. But there were some side characters who were really funny and just thrown in for like laughs. However, after the halfway point, like it was just smut. The book I read most recently is The Holiday Swap. I can't. I can't. It's exhausting to think about this book. I can't. Okay. 2 twin sisters. One of them is a baking TV show host, and the other one runs their family bakery at home. The TV show host one gets a like concussion where she loses her smell and taste, which is very important to judge baked goods on the baking show. So the sisters decide to swap places. They decide that they're going to completely switcheroo, and they develop their own romances with people who the other twin sister definitely would never have dated, which was definitely a weird thing to eventually confess to these people, who were also confused why they were suddenly developing like crushes on people who they had never thought of in that way. Honestly, this book was annoying mostly because of the way it kept switching, and also we had to keep in mind that these people had switched places. It was confusing to be reading constantly because I felt like I was working really hard to understand what was going on. So 2 stars to that. Wouldn't pick that as my Christmas book to read this year. Okay, there are a couple books that I read this year and I did not give a rating to that I want to talk about. And then there are a couple books that I have started reading this year, but I have not finished this year. And because I'm filming this like on the 4th of December, I will probably finish some of these, so I did want to include them in here. There are also other books that I will probably finish before the year ends that I won't be talking about. So first, I want to start with some books that I read this year, but I did not give a reading to, but I'm going to include them because I did read them. So these books I all mostly read for school. So this book is called Half Breed by Maria Campbell. Obviously not reading it because it is a memoir. It's tabbed for an assignment, but also as someone currently taking a lot of Indigenous studies classes, this is definitely a good book to be referencing in your papers. The storytelling is really good in this book, and she recounts events in her life in great detail and really well, and it is just, as a book, if you're not like doing this for academia, it addresses some important topics. It also talks about some historical concepts that like I didn't really know about. Yeah, it's a great story about a Métis woman, and I came to really love Maria's story and learn a lot from her. The next book I read was for a completely different class, and this is called A Map to the Door of No Return. Again, I will not be rating these because I read a lot of life writing this year, like as you saw, and I've come to an understanding that by rating those, you're kind of like rating someone's existence and life. So there's that. This is about the Black diaspora, and it's quite heavily tagged because there are some very good quotes in here, like very interesting and thought-provoking quotes that are just written very eloquently. Another book I read for school is called I Swear I Saw This. Now, I'm not going to tell you, because this is not on my Goodreads, that I read this in completion. Again, same with this book that I'm going to talk about in a bit. Again, that's why I didn't put it on my Goodreads, because I'm not going to put something there that I didn't read to completion. However, I did read a lot of this, and this was for an education class. It's super, I don't think, a required read unless it's for class. It's really small. It's like a notebook journey. You know. This book I read, but as well, I didn't finish this book. This book is called From Harvey River, a memoir of my mother and her people. Not reading this, did read a little bit of this, wouldn't have picked this up if it wasn't for class. Okay, so that battery's also gone. The camera quality is just slowly getting worse over the course of this video. Very quickly, cut me off. 4 books, I did read 2 of them, wouldn't have read them if it wasn't for school. Like, mostly just this one, I think, would be something I would read outside of academia for sure, for like on your own time. And this one, if you are interested in the topic, as well as this one. This one, I just don't think is something you would find interesting unless it was related to some kind of school thing. Okay, some fun books that I have started and not finished. This book I do plan on finishing, so I did want to include it. This is Tessa Bailey's Wreck the Halls, a very silly Christmas story. I'm trying to be quick. I got 20% in The Ashes of the Star-Cursed King. I don't think I'll finish this before the end of the year, but it is a priority, especially with the new book. I read like up to page 60, like 25%. It's a small book of You've Reached Sam on a camping trip. It just didn't feel like the vibe at the time. This one felt very moody, so I was going to read it in the fall. However, that didn't really end up happening. I might pick this up like as a before bed kind of story. It is a bit of a sad story about a couple, a very young couple who were dating, and unfortunately Sam did pass away, and kind of her journey with grief. And one day she picks up the phone because she likes to hear his ringtone, but he actually answers the phone call. This book I didn't get very far into. This is Wildfire, which is the follow-up to Icebreaker. I just feel like this is more of a summary book, and I ended up reading other stories, but I feel like this was meant to be read in the summer, so that's kind of the reason for that book. Okay, those are all the books that I read in 2024. It's crazy that we're going into 2025. I would talk about my TBR for 2025, but I do fear I filmed for like an hour, so I do not think anyone wants to hear me yap any longer. Happy Vlogmas Day 4, but also I'm so interested in knowing what people's reading counts were this year and what your #1 book is, so I know what to put on my TBR for 2025. Thank you so much for hanging out with both me and Gizmo, who's now in a castle of books. And I will see you tomorrow for Vlogmas Day 5. I'm excited to be bringing back the book content and the Bookmas content. Bye!